They say artificial intelligence will replace us all, but no one tells you what happens when the machine panics. When my new boss cut my team's salaries by 50% to fund his delusional automation project, he thought he was trimming the fat. He did not know we were the only thing stopping $1.1 billion in hazardous freight from collapsing the North American supply chain. When the first domino fell, it was terrifyingly silent. Hello to all the amazing listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for being with us, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating, which means we will not be uploading any new videos here for the foreseeable future. We are moving our operations entirely to Patreon, so if you enjoyed today's story, please support us there to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and packed with detailed situations we simply cannot publish on YouTube, all brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story about my life. My name is Piper Morgan. I am 36 years old. I am the head of Special Freight Incident Response at Ethelgard Freight and Logistics. We are a colossal shipping empire, operating out of a towering glass and steel headquarters in downtown Chicago. We move the things that keep the country alive. My department is intentionally small. It is a tight-knit unit of exactly 12 specialists. We do the dirty, highly complicated work that standard logistics algorithms cannot comprehend. We manually handle the nightmares. We route hazardous chemicals through safe zones away from major cities. We manage deep-freeze pharmaceuticals that will become entirely useless if their ambient temperature fluctuates by a single degree. We move sensitive materials that require constant, paranoid human monitoring. It was a Tuesday morning when the execution happened. I walked into the executive glass conference room for my annual performance review. I brought a meticulously prepared portfolio. I fully expected a significant budget increase to handle the upcoming holiday peak season. Our metrics were flawless. We had saved the company millions in liability over the past 12 months. Instead of my usual operations director, a stranger sat in the high-backed leather chair. Marcus Sterling. I was the newly transferred vice president of operations. He wore a bespoke suit that probably cost more than a warehouse supervisor earns in an entire year. His hair was perfectly slicked back. His smile was razor-thin and entirely devoid of warmth. He was a corporate fanatic, a man who worshipped automation and viewed human beings merely as inconvenient line items on a financial spreadsheet. Marcus did not even glance at my performance file. He pushed it toward the edge of the polished mahogany table like a piece of trash. He leaned forward and steepled his perfectly manicured fingers. "We are activating Apex Route," Marcus said. His voice was flat, mechanical, and entirely practiced. "This is our new proprietary artificial intelligence system. It is highly advanced, effective immediately. Apex Route will take over 90% of your department's logistical workload." I sat perfectly still. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin and suffocating. I knew about the Apex Route project, but it was purely theoretical. It was nowhere near ready for real-world deployment in our sector. "Because of this unprecedented optimization," Marcus continued smoothly, "the company no longer needs to compensate your team for intensive manual oversight. The salaries for you and your entire department will be reduced by exactly 50%. This change goes into effect next month." My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs, but I kept my face entirely blank. I refused to give him the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. A 50% pay cut was not a corporate restructuring. It was an insult. It was a calculated eviction notice wrapped in corporate jargon. "You cannot do that," I said, keeping my tone dangerously level. "Apex Route has never been tested with live biopharma shipments. It has absolutely no historical baseline for routing highly volatile materials. The system lacks human intuition and situational awareness. If you remove manual oversight from these specific, highly regulated supply chains, you are begging for an unmitigated disaster." Marcus let out a short, condescending laugh. He waved a dismissive hand in the air. He cut me off before I could explain the strict federal guidelines we navigated every single day. "This is called financial discipline. Piper," he said, speaking to me as if I were a slow, insubordinate child. "The machine is smarter, faster, and significantly cheaper than 12 glorified dispatchers. We are moving this company into the future. If you or anyone on your team cannot stomach the new financial reality, the door is always open." He picked up a heavy, gold-plated pen. He pulled the official payroll reduction authorization form from his leather folder. He signed it right in front of me. The sharp scratch of his pen was loud in the quiet room. A cold, arrogant execution. He did not care about the mortgages my team had to pay. He did not care about the children they had to feed. He did not care about the highly fragile cargo hurtling across the continent at 80 miles per hour. He only cared about the massive bonus he would receive for slashing the operational budget. I did not argue. You cannot reason with a spreadsheet wearing a human suit. I stood up slowly. I walked out of the glass room and closed the heavy door behind me. I stood on the metal catwalk overlooking the main operations floor. Down below, my team was hustling. Keyboards were clattering. Phones were ringing incessantly. 12 brilliant minds were keeping the blood of the North American economy pumping. I looked back through the soundproof glass. Marcus was already staring down at his phone, completely detached from the human lives he had just fractured. A bitter, chilling truth washed over me. I realized this massive corporate empire was never going to be destroyed by our industry competitors. It was going to be completely dismantled from the inside, piece by piece, by the arrogant boss sitting in that very room. I gathered my team of 12 specialists in the main break room at the end of the shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pale glow over the worn laminate tables and the stale coffee sitting in the glass pot. These were brilliant, dedicated people. They were the invisible shield protecting the public from catastrophic logistical failures. I stood at the front of the room and delivered the news about the 50% salary reduction. I expected anger. I braced myself for someone to throw a coffee mug against the wall, or for a wave of shouting and furious demands for a union representative. But there was absolutely none of that. Instead, there was just a heavy, suffocating silence. It was the sound of 12 working professionals, simultaneously doing the brutal mental math of their own survival. Shoulders slumped, eyes dropped to the floor. The collective exhaustion in the room was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. They did not see this as a battle to fight. They saw it exactly for what it was, a cold, calculated eviction. Exactly 48 hours later, the first resignation letter landed on my desk. It came from Elias. He was our senior route analyst for medical freight. Elias was the kind of man who arrived 15 minutes early every single day and kept framed photographs of his 2 young daughters right next to his monitor. He was the only person in the building who completely understood the intricate transit regulations for shipping unstable radioactive isotopes used in cancer treatments. I walked into my office and gently placed the crisp white envelope on my desk. His face held no malice, only a profound, bone-deep weariness. "I am so sorry, Piper," Elias said quietly, keeping his voice steady. "I love this team, but I have a mortgage on the house, and my youngest needs braces next year. A 50% cut destroys everything. The family math just does not work." I stood up and shook his hand. I did not try to convince him to stay because I knew he was making the only logical choice a father could make. That was the beginning of the quiet evacuation. We did not experience a dramatic walkout. There were no cardboard protest signs in the parking lot. The modern American white-collar worker does not usually riot when their dignity is stripped away. They simply update their resumes, quietly pack their desk plants into cardboard boxes, and walk out the door. Within exactly 3 weeks, 8 of my 12 core members handed in their notices. They were highly skilled experts with decades of combined experience, and the logistics market knew their worth even if Marcus Sterling did not. They were quickly poached by our direct competitors, operating out of Miami and Seattle, accepting massive sign-on bonuses and salaries that properly reflected their specialized knowledge. Every day, the operational floor grew quieter. The empty desks looked like missing teeth in a smile. Monitors went dark. The constant, reassuring hum of collaboration faded away, replaced by the hollow echo of ringing phones that no one was available to answer. Knowing the impending disaster we were facing, I sat down and drafted a comprehensive emergency risk assessment report. I poured every ounce of my operational knowledge into those pages. I meticulously detailed the massive systemic vulnerabilities created by the sudden loss of our senior staff. I mapped out the exact failure points where highly sensitive chemical and biological shipments would be left completely unmonitored once the AI system took over. I attached the document to an urgently flagged email and sent it directly to Julianne Vance, the Director of Risk Compliance. Julianne was a notorious corporate survivor. She was someone who built her entire career by smiling in meetings, avoiding any direct responsibility, and never, ever challenging senior leadership. Her response arrived in my inbox exactly 10 minutes later. It was a masterpiece of hollow corporate deflection. Thank you for your input, Piper. The executive team will note your concerns, and we will be monitoring the transition closely. I knew exactly what that meant. Julianne had dragged my extensive, life-saving report straight into her digital trash bin. She was absolutely terrified of upsetting Marcus and his new financial mandate. She chose the safety of her own lucrative job over the safety of the North American supply chain. That left only 4 of us. Me, and 3 remaining team members who were physically tethered to the city by sick parents or spouses who could not relocate. We huddled together in the center of the massive, empty department. The sheer volume of incoming freight data was overwhelming. We were drowning in specialized manifests, desperately trying to manually route hazardous cargo while surviving on cold takeout food and purely running on adrenaline. We were a skeleton crew standing on the tracks, watching the train rushing toward us. High above us on the executive floor, the countdown clock to the official activation of Apex Route continued to tick down, completely blind to the tragedy it was about to unleash. The official activation of Apex Route happened on a Monday morning. There was no grand ceremony on our floor. There was just a sudden, subtle shift in the server, hum beneath our feet. For the first 3 days, the system hummed along in total silence. From the executive dashboard, everything looked like an absolute triumph of modern technology. The freight moved. The digital markers blinked green. On Thursday afternoon, we could actually hear the faint, muffled sounds of a champagne celebration echoing down the elevator shaft from the executive penthouse. Marcus was throwing a lavish party for the upper management to celebrate his brilliant cost-saving initiative. They were toasting to the future while standing on a highly unstable fault line. The illusion of perfection shattered violently during week 2. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. I was staring at my main routing monitor when a single, aggressive red notification box flashed across the screen. Then another, then a dozen more. I pulled up the primary manifest. It was a highly classified shipment of aerospace components. The cargo was valued at several $1,000,000 and was supposed to be rushing toward a heavily secured assembly plant near the Canadian border. Instead, the digital tracker showed the massive armored transport truck taking a sharp, completely unexplainable detour south. I dug into the command log to see who authorized the change. It was not a who, it was the machine. Apex Route had run a background calculation and determined that driving through the Canadian border mountains consumed too much diesel fuel. To achieve maximum fuel optimization, the artificial intelligence had autonomously rerouted the multi-million-dollar aerospace shipment to a standard, unsecured commercial holding warehouse in rural Ohio. The system did not understand that aerospace parts required armed guards and immediate assembly. It only understood saving a few $100s on diesel. Before I could even attempt to manually override the disastrous Ohio reroute, the entire left side of my console lit up like a wildfire. Critical temperature warnings began flooding into the system. I opened the new alerts and felt a cold drop of pure dread hit the bottom of my stomach. Down in southern Texas, a fleet of specially modified refrigerated trailers was transporting highly volatile, temperature-sensitive vaccines. The ambient heat outside those trucks was blazing. The cargo needed to keep moving to maintain the deep freeze airflow over the condenser units. But Apex Route had identified a route that was exactly 3 miles shorter than the approved federal highway path. The algorithm immediately forced the entire fleet off the interstate and directly into the heart of a massive, heavily congested urban construction zone. The trucks were now trapped in a complete gridlock. They were moving at 0 miles per hour in the sweltering Texas sun. The internal temperature gauges on my screen were slowly ticking upward. Degree by agonizing degree, the life-saving vaccines were literally baking inside their trailers. In the past, my full team of 12 would have instantly recognized the traffic anomaly and manually forced the drivers back to the open highway. Now, with only 4 of us left drowning in a sea of red alerts, we did not have the physical manpower to intervene in time. I grabbed my phone and bypassed the standard dispatch channels. I called David Rostova directly. David was the field supply chain director. I was the man on the ground who actually had to deal with the physical chaos our headquarters created. He answered on the first ring. He was already shouting over the deafening roar of truck engines and blaring horns in the background. "Piper, what on earth is happening up there?" David yelled, his voice laced with absolute panic. "My regional transfer stations are completely gridlocked. Trucks are showing up at the wrong docking bays. The automated system is generating shipping manifests for agricultural feed, but the drivers are opening their doors to find highly corrosive industrial solvents. And worse, none of them have the correct customs paperwork to cross state lines. The highway patrol is threatening to impound an entire fleet by midnight." I barely had time to process David's frantic report before my desk phone rang. It was an automated summons to the executive floor. I walked into the glass room. Marcus was leaning against the table, casually sipping sparkling water. He did not look panicked. He looked slightly annoyed. "We are seeing a few minor software bugs in the early phase," Marcus said dismissively, not even looking at the massive stack of red-flagged incident reports I placed in front of him. "The machine is just learning the terrain. It is a standard adjustment period." "These are not bugs, Marcus," I said firmly, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "The system is blindly overriding safety protocols to save pennies on transit time. We have vaccines dying in Texas and aerospace hardware sitting unguarded in an Ohio cornfield. We need to manually reroute the critical tier shipments right now and notify the clients immediately." Marcus slammed his glass down on the table. His arrogant smile vanished. "You will do no such thing," he snapped, his voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. "You are strictly forbidden from contacting any customers. You will not create a panic over a temporary calibration issue. You and your remaining staff will stay at your desks and manually patch the routing errors until the algorithm stabilizes. Do your job. Piper, that is an order." I looked at him for a long, silent moment. I realized exactly what I had to do. I walked back down to my department. My 3 remaining team members looked up at me, their eyes bloodshot, their hands hovering over their keyboards in desperate anticipation. They were waiting for the command to work through the night, to sacrifice their own sanity to save the company from its own arrogance. I stood in the center of the room. I took a deep breath. "Listen to me carefully," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "When the clock strikes exactly 5 in the afternoon, you are all going to log off. You will pack your bags, and you will go home to your families. You will not answer any calls. You will not log in remotely. You will not fix a single system error outside of your contracted working hours." They stared at me in shock. One of them slowly lowered his hands from the keyboard. "We are going to follow the new corporate policy to the exact letter," I continued, feeling a dark, satisfying resolve settle over me. Marcus wanted an automated system. He wanted to remove the human element. So, we are going to remove ourselves. We are going to let his perfect machine run the show. I walked over to my desk, picked up my bag, and logged out of the command console. The screens behind me continued to flash aggressively with critical warnings, a silent symphony of impending destruction. I turned my back on the artificial intelligence and let it march blindly toward the edge of the cliff. By the second month following the salary reductions, the quiet failures of the system erupted into a deafening roar. The executive floor was no longer throwing champagne parties. They were running a battlefield triage center, and they were losing horribly. The inboxes of the board of directors were suddenly under heavy bombardment. Scathing emails from top pharmaceutical giants and aerospace conglomerates poured in by the hour. Clients who had trusted Ethelgard Freight for decades were now threatening immediate termination. The sheer volume of incoming complaints was so massive that the corporate communication servers actually crashed twice in a single week. The chaos was no longer just digital. It was manifesting in the physical world with terrifying consequences. Down at the port of Miami, a massive crisis was unfolding. Dozens of heavy shipping containers filled with highly flammable industrial chemicals were completely stranded. The artificial intelligence had routed them into a temporary holding zone, but the system simply forgot to issue the secondary transit instructions to move them onto specialized rail cars. The containers sat immobilized on the concrete docks, baking under the blistering Florida sun. The temperature outside was soaring past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The internal pressure inside those sealed metal boxes was building to a critical mass. We were in massive, undeniable violation of stringent Department of Transportation federal safety regulations. We were not just facing fines anymore. We were facing the very real possibility of a catastrophic chemical explosion that would level a square mile of the port and kill countless innocent dock workers. Then came the killing blow. Our most lucrative client was a massive national hospital alliance. They relied on our precision logistics network to deliver life-saving surgical equipment and highly specialized surgical tools exactly on time. Without our flawless execution, their operating rooms simply could not function. On a Thursday morning, they sent a formal, legally binding ultimatum directly to our chief executive officer. A massive wave of critical orthopedic surgeries had been abruptly canceled across the entire country because their customized titanium implants and surgical trays were completely lost in transit. The artificial intelligence had somehow classified the life-saving surgical tools as low-priority scrap metal. It had autonomously routed them to a heavy industrial recycling holding facility somewhere in the Midwest. The Hospital Alliance was absolutely furious. They officially announced they were pulling their massive contract by the end of the week. Furthermore, they were preparing to file a massive, highly public lawsuit against Ethelgard Freight and Logistics for gross negligence and breach of contract. The total financial damages they were seeking amounted to exactly $1.1 billion. The threat of losing over $1 billion sent an absolute shockwave of pure panic through the corporate hierarchy. Up in the glass offices, the arrogant confidence evaporated overnight. Marcus Sterling, the man who had championed the flawless machine, was suddenly sweating through his expensive tailored suits. The cold reality set in. He realized that the immense, catastrophic failure of the Apex Rope project was going to be pinned entirely on his chest. In his absolute desperation, Marcus resorted to the oldest, dirtiest trick in the corporate playbook. He decided to find a scapegoat. He locked himself in his office and began frantically drafting fabricated temporary operational reports. He manipulated the internal executive summaries to actively hide the massive algorithm failures. Instead, he began laying the groundwork to place the entire blame squarely on my shoulders. I still had loyal friends in the information technology department who silently forwarded me the confidential drafts Marcus was sending to the executive board. He was officially accusing me of subversive sabotage and incredibly poor management. He claimed that my team and I were deliberately refusing to cooperate with the new advanced system. He told the board we were intentionally allowing the cargo to fail, just to prove a point about our reduced salaries. He was aggressively painting me as a disgruntled, rogue manager actively trying to destroy the company from the inside out to exact petty revenge. Meanwhile, Julianne Vance, our director of risk compliance, finally smelled the smoke. The billion-dollar lawsuit threat woke her up from her comfortable corporate slumber in a cold sweat. She suddenly remembered the highly predictive emergency risk assessment report I had sent her right before the disaster officially started. It was the exact report she had completely ignored and discarded to keep Marcus happy. Utter panic set in as she realized that if the board of directors discovered she had actively buried a direct warning about a billion-dollar catastrophe, her lucrative career would be instantly vaporized. She would be blacklisted from the industry forever. My internal network told me she spent an entire afternoon frantically digging through her digital trash bin, trying to recover my initial email so she could figure out a way to alter the timeline and somehow save her own skin. They were both scrambling like rats on a sinking ship, desperately trying to rewrite history to protect their massive salaries and inflated egos. But they severely underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. They thought I was just sitting quietly at my desk, weeping over my lost wages, waiting to be fired. They had no idea I was already holding the absolute winning hand. While Marcus was busy forging executive summaries, I reached out to David Rostova. David and I knew exactly how these corporate cover-ups worked. When the corporate guillotine finally fell, the executives would immediately try to wipe the system logs to hide the machine's absolute incompetence. We could not let them control the narrative. Late one night, long after the executive floor was completely empty and the cleaning staff had gone home, David and I initiated a shadow protocol. While the rest of the building slept, we completely bypassed the standard reporting interfaces. We dug straight into the root architecture of the highly restricted company mainframe. We quietly downloaded the entire raw data log of the artificial intelligence system directly onto a highly encrypted, military-grade personal hard drive. We captured absolutely everything. We had every single automated decision, every single bypassed safety protocol, and every single flawed routing command the machine had executed since the very moment Marcus activated it. The raw data was incredibly dense, but it was absolutely irrefutable. It proved, with absolute mathematical certainty, that 100% of the catastrophic decisions came directly from the algorithmic core of the new system. There was zero human error involved. Furthermore, my team had perfectly documented every single instance where the system intentionally locked us out of manual overrides, proving we tried to stop the bleeding but were blocked by Marcus's own system parameters. Marcus was frantically trying to build a fragile house of cards to frame me for his monumental failure. He did not realize I was quietly sitting in the dark, holding a match, just waiting for the perfect moment to burn his entire illusion to the ground. I did not waste a single second worrying about Marcus and his pathetic attempts to frame me for his catastrophic failures. While he was desperately locked in his office typing up fake performance reviews to justify my termination, I was hunting for the real motive. I knew the artificial intelligence was an absolute disaster, but the sheer speed at which it was pushed into production never made sense to me. Corporate bureaucracy is traditionally incredibly slow. The Apex Root project had been rammed through the executive approval process at lightning speed, completely bypassing the standard rigorous testing phases. I opened a heavily secured terminal on my secondary laptop. Using the raw data logs David and I had extracted from the mainframe, I carefully reverse-engineered the system architecture to find the original developer signatures. That digital breadcrumb trail led me directly into the restricted financial servers, uncovering the vendor contracts hidden deep within the company intranet. What I found completely blew the doors off the entire situation. I discovered exactly why Marcus had slashed my department's payroll by exactly 50%. It had absolutely nothing to do with standard corporate cost-cutting or financial discipline. The encrypted financial ledgers told a very different, highly illegal story. The software development for Apex Root had gone completely over budget several months ago. It was bleeding cash at an alarming rate. To hide this massive deficit from the executive board, Marcus desperately needed an untraceable slush fund. He literally stole half the livelihood of my 12 dedicated specialists and quietly funneled every single penny of our missing wages directly into the software vendor's corporate accounts to cover his severe budget overruns. But the rabbit hole went much deeper than a simple corporate cover-up. I ran a deep, comprehensive background check on the vendor. It was a shadowy technology startup registered under a shell corporation in the state of Delaware. The public corporate officers listed on the registry were just empty names, professional proxies paid to sign paperwork. But when I traced the initial seed funding and the primary tax beneficiary through several offshore holding accounts, a very familiar last name finally popped up on the screen. The anonymous owner of the software company was Marcus's own brother-in-law. It was a breathtakingly brazen scheme. Marcus was not just an arrogant executive blinded by a love for new technology. He was a white-collar criminal. He was actively embezzling millions of dollars from Ethelgard Freight, laundering our stolen salaries through a dummy software project, and directly enriching his own family members. He had completely sold out the safety of the entire North American supply chain just to line his own pockets. Just as the sheer magnitude of his fraud washed over me, the emergency alarm on my tracking monitor shattered the silence of my office. It was a terrifying, high-pitched siren reserved exclusively for critical radioactive incidents. I spun around to face the main screen. The crisis had officially reached its absolute peak. A specialized, heavily shielded container holding highly volatile medical radioisotopes had triggered a catastrophic routing error. These specific isotopes were critical, irreplaceable components for targeted pediatric cancer treatments. They possessed a maximum viable shelf life of exactly 48 hours from the moment they left the reactor. If they did not reach the National Oncology Center within that precise window, they would decay into completely useless, highly radioactive garbage. The patients scheduled for those immediate, life-saving treatments would simply not survive the week. The automated system had inexplicably classified the shielded medical container as standard bulk agricultural minerals. It had directed the loading cranes to drop the radioisotopes onto an entirely unmanned, automated freight train currently rolling right through the dead center of the Nevada desert. To make matters infinitely worse, the artificial intelligence had engaged an automated lockdown protocol on the train cars, completely sealing the heavy steel doors and overriding all external manual commands. The machine refused to let anyone near the cargo. The clock was ruthlessly ticking down. We had less than 2 days before a monumental medical tragedy occurred, and Ethelgard Freight would be held entirely responsible by the federal government. Our reputation and the lives of innocent people were literally evaporating in the desert heat. This was the definitive moment. There was no time left to play office politics. I did not report the radioactive incident to Marcus. I did not send a desperate warning memo to Julianne Vance. I knew they would only try to bury the information to protect themselves while the clock ran out. Weeks earlier, anticipating a complete operational collapse, I had secretly requested and secured a Level 1 priority security clearance key from a sympathetic contact in the Network Administration Department. I plugged my encrypted drive into the terminal. This drive contained the raw system logs, proving the machine's failure, the financial embezzlement trail, the dummy corporation ownership documents, and the live ticking clock of the Nevada desert crisis. I compiled absolutely everything into a single, devastating electronic dossier. I attached the formal, legally binding ultimatums from the Hospital Alliance and our major aerospace partners. I titled the email simply, Impending Catastrophe and Executive Fraud. I completely bypassed the standard chain of command. I entered the direct, highly confidential personal email addresses of every single sitting member of the Ethelgard Board of Directors. I checked my watch. It was exactly 2 in the morning. I hit send. The silence in my office that followed was electric. I sat back in my chair, staring at the delivery confirmation on my screen. I knew that in luxury penthouses and sprawling estates across the city, the most powerful people in the company were about to wake up to a $1.1 billion nightmare. Less than 4 hours later, my phone lit up with a high-priority corporate alert. An unannounced, mandatory emergency meeting of the entire board of directors had been summoned for 8 o'clock sharp. The guillotine was officially raised. The atmosphere inside the executive boardroom was so heavy it felt like breathing underwater. When I walked through the massive oak doors with David right beside me, the entire board of directors was already seated around the long mahogany table. They looked absolutely terrified. Millions of dollars in personal wealth were evaporating with every passing second. Marcus Sterling was standing at the head of the table. He had been called in just moments before, completely oblivious to the digital bomb I had detonated in their inboxes at 2 in the morning. He wore a crisp, tailored suit and his signature arrogant smile. He actually believed he was there to give a routine update. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Marcus began smoothly, straightening his silk tie, "I assure you, The minor logistical hiccups we are experiencing are solely due to the deliberate incompetence of Piper Morgan and her department. They simply refuse to adapt to the future. I am actively preparing the termination paperwork to remove her toxic influence. I did not even wait for him to finish his rehearsed lie. I walked straight up to the main presentation console and slammed my encrypted hard drive into the port. "Let us look at the actual future. Marcus," I said loudly, commanding the entire room. I hit a single key. The massive screen covering the back wall instantly illuminated. I did not show them routing errors. I showed them the money. A gigantic, undeniable financial flowchart filled the screen. It traced the exact amount of my team's stolen payroll, moving through hidden corporate accounts, directly into the offshore bank accounts of the dummy software corporation owned entirely by Marcus's brother-in-law. The color instantly drained from Marcus's face. His arrogant smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I clicked to the next slide. A massive, glowing red map of North America appeared. "That is your embezzled money," I told the board, my voice ringing clearly in the silent room. "And this is the result. Right now, exactly $1.1 billion in critical freight is completely paralyzed. Furthermore, you have a rogue, automated train locked down in the Nevada desert, holding highly unstable medical isotopes that will expire in less than 30 hours. The Hospital Alliance is drafting a massive lawsuit as we speak." The chairman of the board, an older man with silver hair and a terrifying glare, turned his eyes slowly toward Marcus. "Is this true?" the chairman asked, his voice shaking with absolute rage. Before Marcus could even formulate a lie, I tossed a thick printed folder onto the center of the mahogany table. "I warned the company about this exact catastrophic failure a month ago," I stated. I sent a highly detailed emergency risk assessment directly to Julianne Vance. She actively buried it. Julianne was sitting halfway down the table. She turned completely pale. The moment the chairman looked at her, her corporate loyalty instantly evaporated. She cracked perfectly under the pressure. "He forced me to do it!" Julianne screamed, pointing a trembling finger directly at Marcus. "Marcus told me if I showed that report to the board, he would personally ensure I was fired and blacklisted from the logistics industry. I had no choice." The entire room erupted into chaos. The chairman slammed his hand down on the table, demanding silence. He looked directly at me. He was no longer a powerful executive. He was a desperate man watching his empire burn to the ground. "Piper," the chief executive officer interrupted, his voice laced with pure desperation. "The Nevada train, the medical cargo, the billion-dollar alliance contract. Can you save it?" I looked at the men and women in their expensive suits. They had completely surrendered. "Yes," I said calmly, "but I have conditions, effective immediately. I want total operational control of the entire logistics grid. I want 100% of my team's salaries restored, backdated to the moment they were cut. I want the annual budget for my department doubled to hire back my senior staff, and I want him fired. Right here, right now." I pointed straight at Marcus. Marcus lost his mind. His carefully crafted professional mask completely shattered. He lunged forward, his face bright red, screaming hysterically and cursing at everyone in the room. He threatened to sue the company. He threatened to ruin my life. But he was just a pathetic, exposed fraud throwing a tantrum. The chairman did not even blink. He pressed a button under the table. Less than 30 seconds later, 4 heavy-set corporate security guards entered the boardroom. They grabbed Marcus by the arms, forcefully stripped the electronic security badge off his lapel, and dragged him kicking and screaming out of the glass doors. A legal team was already waiting in the lobby to serve him with a federal subpoena for severe corporate fraud and insider embezzlement. The moment the doors closed behind him, I did not waste another second. I pulled out my mobile phone and activated the radio application. I had secretly kept in constant contact with every single member of my old team. "Elias," I said into the receiver, "it is Piper. The nightmare is over. You have your full salary back, plus a massive hazard bonus. Get everyone online right now. We have a medical train to catch." Over the next 24 hours, nobody on my team slept. We brought back the brilliant, experienced human minds that built this company. We bypassed the locked mainframe, manually hacked into the Nevada train's localized control system, and forced the heavy steel doors open. We deployed a specialized emergency transport crew via helicopter to extract the radioactive isotopes. Through pure, agonizing human grit and decades of actual logistics experience, we manually rerouted the chemical containers in Miami and untangled the massive web of stalled freight across the country. The medical payload was successfully delivered to the oncology center with exactly 4 hours to spare. The Hospital Alliance immediately withdrew their massive lawsuit. We pulled the company back from the absolute brink of destruction. The next morning, the sun rose brightly over the Chicago skyline. I walked onto the executive floor and stepped into the massive corner office that used to belong to Marcus. I sat down in the high-backed leather chair. I opened the main server interface on the massive monitor. With one highly satisfying keystroke, I permanently deactivated the Apex Route artificial intelligence system. The servers hummed down into silence. Order had finally been restored. I leaned back in my new chair, smiled, and took a slow, quiet sip of my hot morning coffee. Thank you so much to all our amazing listeners for staying until the very end of this journey. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying, remember that we absolutely will not be uploading any new videos here on YouTube in the near future due to the demonetization. We are completely moving our operations to Patreon. Please help us survive by joining our Patreon channel to hear the absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code right now on your screen, or by clicking the link provided in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you for your incredible support, and we will see you on Patreon.